Welcome back to the Thoughtful Techie Cloud YouTube channel. In today's video, we're going to talk about the AWS Certified Cloud Practitioner exam, which is the very first AWS certification I recommend, especially if you don't have a tech background. Let's jump into it. The AWS Cloud Practitioner exam is a fundamental AWS certification. So who should take this exam? AWS Certified Cloud Practitioner is intended for anyone who has basic knowledge of the AWS platform. Before taking this exam, AWS recommends 6 months of exposure to the AWS cloud, basic understanding of IT services and their uses in the AWS cloud platform, and knowledge of AWS services, use cases, billing, pricing models, security concepts, and how cloud impacts your business. Now, the part where it says 6 months of exposure to AWS cloud, this is great to have, but if you're just starting directly from scratch, you can gain the knowledge you need to still be able to clear the exam just in your studying process. In terms of what it takes to earn the certification, you need to pass the AWS Certified Cloud Practitioner exam, and that exam features a combination of 2 question formats. That's multiple choice and multiple response. The exam, again, is considered foundational. It's 90 minutes to complete. The cost is $100 US. The format of the exam includes 65 questions. And again, that's a mix of multiple choice and multiple response. So what I'm going to do now is go ahead and spend the remaining of the time we have here together on the exam guide. The exams guide is very detailed, and we're going to jump into this because this is the meat and potatoes of what is going to be on the exam and everything you're going to need to know. So this is the exam guide here. I'm going to link this in the description below so you can have your own copy of this. But it says here, the exam validates a candidate's ability to complete the following task. Let's zoom in on these because we're going to expand on these later. You need to be able to explain the value of AWS Cloud, understand and explain the AWS shared responsibility model, understand security best practices, understand AWS cloud cost, economics, and billing practices, describe and position the core AWS services, including the compute, network, database, and storage, and identify AWS services for common use cases. This is a bit of an extension of what the AWS Cloud Certification page said on the website, but deeper in information. Recommended AWS knowledge, AWS cloud concepts, security and compliance within the AWS cloud, understanding of the core AWS services, understanding of the economics of AWS cloud. Now, what is considered out of scope for the target candidate? These are the things that you are not expected to know, with a capital N-O-T, not. You don't need to know how to code. You don't need to know how to design a cloud architecture. There's no troubleshooting of cloud problems. You don't need to know how to implement the solutions. You don't need to know how to do a cloud migration. You don't need to perform or know how to do any load or performance testing. And you don't need to know anything about Amazon Chime, Amazon Workmail, and Amazon Alexa. And I want to say the word because it'll trip up all my Echo devices in here. All right, again, we mentioned that the exam is multiple choice and multiple response. Now, here's an interesting thing here. There is some unscored content on here. So apparently the exam includes 15 unscored questions that do not affect your score. It says here, AWS collects information about the candidate performance on these unscored questions to evaluate these questions for future use as scored questions. These unscored questions are not identified on the exam. So you got about 15 questions that would be unscored. Again, there's a total of 65 questions on the exam. It looks like 15 of them are unscored, or what I would call experimental questions. So if you miss those, you'll still be okay. Exam results are reported as a scale of 100 to 1,000. The minimum passing score is 700. So you can still miss a handful of questions and still clear this exam. Now, I'm going to skip forward to really what counts here, and that is the 4 domains that will be tested on the Cloud Practitioner exam. The first domain is cloud concepts. That's 26% of your exam. We're going to go into deeper detail on what each of these domains include. Domain 2 is security and compliance, 25%. So again, about a quarter of what will be in the exam. Now, domain 3, technology, has 33% of what will be tested of you out of 100%. And then domain 4, billing and pricing, is 16%. So not too much on the billing and pricing. So if you're looking at this closely, you don't want to mess up on the technology, because if you do that, you could potentially not clear the exam if you trip up on this, because it's worth 33%. Now let's jump into the actual domains in depth. So in domain 1 for cloud concept, you need to be able to define the cloud and its value proposition. You need to have an understanding of the benefits of AWS Cloud, including security, reliability, high availability, elasticity, agility, pay-as-you-go pricing, scalability, global reach, and economies of scale. You need to be able to explain how AWS Cloud allows users to focus on business value. And in an AWS context, you usually see a lot of talk around how AWS removes undifferentiated heavy lifting. This coincides with this particular bullet point nicely. And you need to know about how to shift technical resources to revenue generating activities as opposed to managing infrastructure. That managing infrastructure is an undifferentiated heavy lift, which means if you do that, you're not making your organization more innovative. You're just doing the keeping the lights on stuff that's really slowing you down, impeding you. Bullet point 1.2 is identify aspects of AWS Cloud economics. You need to be able to define the items that would be part of a total cost of ownership proposal. Know the difference between operational expense, OpEx, versus capital expense, and understand labor costs associated with on-premises operations. On-premises operations includes the cost far beyond just software and hardware. You have to hire people to maintain on-premises data centers. There's the power and the cooling, the electricity, the physical cost, the floor space, the data center leases, all these types of things that you need to have an awareness of. Understand the impact of software licensing costs when you move to the cloud. Identify which operations will reduce costs by moving to the cloud. That includes right-sized infrastructure, benefits of automation, reduce compliance scope, for example, reporting, and know about some managed services. That could be RDS, which is a relational database service. That could be ECS, which is Elastic Container Service, EKS, which is Elastic Kubernetes Service, or DynamoDB. Bullet point 1.3, you need to be able to explain the different cloud architecture design principles, being able to know what designing for failure means, know the concept of decoupling components versus monolithic architectures, be able to implement elasticity in the cloud versus on-premises, what that looks like. Thinking in parallel. Cloud is not just about throwing one big computer at a problem, but throwing several computers at the problem and parallelizing out that workload. Okay, moving on to domain 2, security and compliance. Know about and to be able to define the AWS shared responsibility model, recognize the elements of the shared responsibility model, describe the customer responsibility on AWS. That includes things like describing how the customer responsibility may shift depending on which service is used. Are you using EC2, which you have to own the full stack of that guest operating system, or are you using something like an RDS, a managed service, where the guest operating system is not exposed to you, or Lambda, where the server itself isn't even exposed to you. You just write code and allow Lambda to execute that based on an event. And then you need to know what AWS's responsibilities are in that shared responsibility model. Bullet point 2.2, define AWS cloud security and compliance concepts. Identifying where to find AWS compliance information. In other words, where do you find those HIPAA reports or those SOC reports? Recognizing that compliance requirements vary among the AWS services. At a high level, you need to be able to describe how customers achieve compliance on AWS. That includes identifying different encryption options on AWS, for example, encryption in transit, encryption at rest. Describe who enables the encryption on AWS for a given service. Recognizing whether there are services that will aid in auditing and reporting, what services those would be. Recognize that logs exist for auditing and monitoring. Do not have to understand the logs themselves, just know which services those are. Be able to define and know about Amazon CloudWatch, and AWS Config, and AWS Cloud Control, and talk about the concept of least privilege access from a security standpoint. Bullet point 2.3, identify AWS access management capabilities. That would be things like access keys, password policies, rotation and complexity, multi-factor authentication. I have a YouTube video talking about multi-factor authentication that I have on the channel there that you can also take a look at. AWS Identity and Access Management, more commonly referred to as IAM, knowing the relationship between groups and users, roles, policies, managed policies, and compare those to custom policies. And tasks that require use of root accounts and how to protect your root account. Again, this exam is fundamental, but there's a lot of topics on here that you need to be familiar with. Bullet point 2.4, identifying resources for security support. Recognizing there are different network security capabilities. That's a mix of native AWS services, for example, security groups, network access control lists, sometimes abbreviated as NACLs, AWS WAF, which is the AWS Web Application Firewall, to protect you against layer 7 attacks, and third-party security products from the AWS Marketplace that you can use. Recognize there's documentation, and how do you find it for security best practices, white papers, official documents, being able to go to the AWS Knowledge Center, the Security Center, Security Forum, security blogs, and partner system integrators, getting information on products to secure your AWS environments from there. Know how to perform security checks via the AWS Trusted Advisor service. Lots of great stuff here. Now, let's dive into Domain 3, Technology. Now, Domain 3 is comprised of 33% of your Cloud Practitioner exam, so you really got to get this stuff right. Bullet point 3.1, define methods of deploying and operating in the AWS Cloud. Being able to identify high-level different ways of provisioning and operating in AWS Cloud, which includes programmatic access, APIs, software development kits, the AWS Management Console, the CLI, also known as the Command Line Interface, and infrastructure as code. These are all different ways in which you can invoke AWS APIs and consume AWS services and infrastructure and managed services. Identify different types of cloud deployment models, all in the cloud, and cloud native. That includes hybrid, on-premises, being able to identify connectivity options, virtual private networks, AWS Direct Connect, the public internet. Bullet point 3.2, defining the AWS global infrastructure. You need to be able to understand the relationship between regions and availability zones and edge locations. Being able to describe how to achieve high availability through the use of multiple availability zones. This is, this might be fundamental stuff to learn on AWS, but the fundamentals are called the fundamentals for a reason. Even after you've passed the certification, 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now, you're going to be coming back to these fundamentals, which will be the baseline level of knowledge that will help you to build on your current knowledge and will still be used in more sophisticated architectural patterns. This is just such a great certification to learn. Describe how to achieve high availability through the use of multiple availability zones. Recall that high availability is achieved using the multiple availability zones, also abbreviated as AZs, and recognize that availability zones do not share single points of failure. That's good. That's great. They're on their own separate fault planes. Being able to describe when to consider the use of multiple AWS regions and whether or not that is for disaster recovery and business continuity, whether that's a low latency for end user use case, or perhaps it's a data sovereignty use case. Being able to describe at a high level the benefits of edge locations. Edge locations are leveraged by the Amazon CloudFront service, as well as the AWS Global Accelerator service. Bullet point 3.3, identifying the core AWS services. Being familiar with and being able to describe the categories of services on AWS. That includes compute, storage, network, and database. Identify AWS compute services. Recognize that there are different families. For example, AWS Lambda, Amazon Elastic Container Service, which is Amazon ECS, or Amazon EC2, Elastic Compute Cloud, etc. Being able to recognize that elasticity is achieved through something called auto-scaling, and identify the purpose for load balancers and being able to know what those are for. Identify different AWS storage services. For example, Amazon S3 or Amazon Elastic Block Store, which is EBS, Amazon S3 Glacier, AWS Snowball, Amazon Elastic File System, which is Amazon EFS, Amazon Storage Gateway. Being able to identify AWS networking services such as VPC, which stands for Virtual Private Cloud. Identify security groups and what you use those for. Identify the purpose of Amazon Route 53, a domain name service, which resolves fully qualified domain names and host names back to IP addresses so that you can route your traffic across the internet using Route 53. Identify, as I mentioned earlier, VPNs and Direct Connect. Identify different AWS database services. Know how to install databases on Amazon EC2 versus how you would leverage AWS managed database services such as Relational Database Service, abbreviated as RDS, to run your database engine. Again here, identify Amazon RDS, know about Amazon DynamoDB, and know about Amazon Redshift. Bullet point 3.4, identify resources for technology support. Recognize there's documentation. Again, we mentioned this earlier. There's best practice, blogs, white papers, the AWS Knowledge Center, forums, and blogs to learn how to know the well-architected best practices. Matter of fact, the AWS well-architected framework is a technical paper that you definitely need to take a look at. And be familiar with the different levels of AWS support. There's AWS Abuse, which is a security support offering through AWS, which proactively notifies you of nefarious things that may be going on within your environments that you should be aware of. The AWS support cases that you can open up. Premium support. This is support you can pay for to get faster SLAs and response times. Technical account managers. Those are aligned to enterprise support. Recognize that there's a partner network, which is, for example, marketplace and third-party offerings that include independent software vendors and system integrators. Identify sources of AWS technical assistance and knowledge, including professional services, solution architects. I'm a solution architect, in case you didn't already know. Training and certification, and the Amazon Partner Network to help you implement AWS solutions. And again, know the benefits of AWS Trusted Advisor. We see that again. And the last domain, billing and pricing. Bullet point for this, 4.1. Compare and contrast the various pricing models for AWS. For example, on-demand instances versus reserve instances and spot instance pricing. Identifies the scenarios and best fit for when you should use on-demand versus reserve instance pricing, as well as spot instance pricing. Bullet point 4.2. Recognize the various account structures in relation to AWS billing and pricing. Recognize that consolidated billing is a feature of AWS organizations, and identify how multiple accounts aid in allocating cost across departments. Bullet point 4.3. Identify resources available for billing support. That includes being able to identify ways to get billing support, whether that's through Cost Explorer, AWS Cost and Usage Report, Amazon QuickSight, third-party partners, and the AWS Marketplace tool. Being able to open a billing support case if you have billing questions. You can open up an AWS support ticket with the billing team. The role of a concierge for AWS Enterprise Support Plans. Enterprise Support not only has a technical account manager, but they also have a AWS Support Concierge that can help you navigate certain things and perform certain actions on your behalf if you give them permission. Identify where to find pricing information on AWS services. That would be things like the AWS Simple Monthly Calculator or the AWS Service Product Pages. And AWS even has a pricing API in which you can do API calls to get the current prices of AWS services. Also be familiar with knowing how to identify how tags are used in cost allocation. Okay, that is the 4 domains you should know about. For the remaining appendix, I'm not going to go over this word for word, but again, I'm going to link this document in the description here down below. You can take a look at the appendix. This is just a summary of some of the services that were mentioned up in domains 1 through 4 above that you might want to become familiar with and take a look. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, definitely give it a thumbs up, comment below on what you liked and if this helped you out, and make sure you subscribe. I will be creating additional YouTube videos that will expand on the domains within the Cloud Practitioner certification that will help you towards passing your certification.